Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Bojan Elek. I'm a researcher at Belgrade Centre for Security Policy, and it is my great pleasure to be able to welcome you to this online event. Belgrade Centre for Security Policy is hosting this today's event on April 19, which marks exactly 8 years since the signing of the Brussels Agreement, or the first agreement on principles of normalizations between Belgrade and Pristina. Today's event, we will be having two distinguished panels, where in the first panel, we will be discussing the expectations regarding the signing and the implementation of the Brussels Agreement, focusing on local perspectives. And the second panel will be focusing on the prospects for reaching comprehensive normalization agreement between Belgrade and Pristina. Before I present the distinguished panel, I wanted to share some technical considerations with the participants. As I said, we will be having two panels. Each will last for 1 hour. There will be a 10-minute break between the two. The working language is in English. On Belgrade Centre for Security Policy Facebook stream, you will be able to follow the event in English. And on Belgrade Centre for Security Policy YouTube channel, there will be translation provided in Serbian and in Albanian. You will be also able to send questions and comments through online platforms, and we will have 15 minutes at the end of this panel to answer them, and our panelists will comment on them. This would be technical rules of today's engagement, and without further ado, I would like to present the panelists of the first panel. We will be discussing the Brussels Agreement and 8 years since its implementation. Today with us, we have Tatjana Lazarevic. She's editor-in-chief of Kosovo Info news portal, which is a specialized news portal that focuses on reporting on what Serbian community is experiencing in post-Brussels Agreement North Kosovo. Tatjana, welcome. Thank you for joining us. She will be joining us via Zoom. Then we have Jovana Radosavljevic. She is Executive Director of New Social Initiative, an NGO from North Kosovo. Thank you for joining us today in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
And lastly, we have Donika Amini. She's Executive Director of Civicos Platform from Pristina. She's also a member of Balkan in Europe Policy Advisory Group and a PhD candidate at the University of Westminster. Donika, thank you for joining us. It's really a pleasure to see you after all these years.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
To just frame the debate, as I said, April 19, 2013 was the day when the Brussels Agreement was signed in Brussels as a part of the EU-mediated dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. And I have a warm-up round of questions for our participants. So if we go back to 2013, when this agreement was signed, it came pretty much out of the blue. Nobody was expecting it. What were your first impressions and expectations that you had regarding this agreement? And now, 8 years later, did this agreement and its implementation live up to your expectations? And let's start with Tatjana. Can you share your thoughts on this?
My still striking impression is with what amount of illegal actions and serious crimes the road on the field to implement this agreement has been paved in the north of Kosovo. Because it is important even today to recall that the root of the emergence of the agreement was to integrate the North into self-proclaimed Kosovo state for its further recognition. Just to list, the first big bite was in 2013 and 2014 with local elections, with 3 rounds of elections in North Mitrovica, breaking ballot boxes in September, physical violence against the newly elected mayor, and his resignation, I think, in November. The assassination of a mayoral candidate in the middle of the campaign in the 3rd round in January, and the imprisonment of another mayoral candidate 10 days later, to be assassinated again 4 years later. So the entire process ended with the applause of Europe that democracy won. This is my still everlasting impression. So therefore, as for the Serbs in the north are concerned, the Brussels Agreement is imposed, and it is also fair to recognize even 8 years later. The dismantlement of Serbia's state institutions was against the will of the residents in 4 predominant Serb municipalities. The North was institutionally and politically introduced by force through Belgrade into the state of Kosovo. So, and at the core of such foundations, one could expect where are we standing today? This is actually also myself and my organization have alerted already in the beginning. This is the nurturing of hybrid reality, but with warnings that the future could be even more gloomy. So I'll stop maybe with this pessimistic introduction. Perhaps we discover some stars in the course of
Thank you, Tatiana. We will have the opportunity to discuss in detail the elections and the establishment of municipalities. But let's move on to Jovana. Jovana, what were your first impressions when you learned about the signing of the Brussels Agreement, and 8 years later, your expectations? Have they been met?
I think you said it very well in the beginning, that it was an out-of-the-blue agreement and nobody really knew what to expect, but things kind of were fast-forwarded from the moment, and the reality really changed for the Kosovo Serb community and generally the community living in the north. I mean, these elections, they were held for the first time on the entire territory of Kosovo that are being called historical, or in many ways could be in many ways disputed in the way that they were carried out. But still, they were enough to create and establish the municipalities and kind of like fast forward this integration process. What really happened there is that the local community was not ready for that and didn't actually feel that they want to be a part of the process. And I think that as a consequence, we have the current political atmosphere now and the political landscape when it comes to the Serb community in Kosovo, where there is only one political party representing the Serbian interests that is actually directly tied to the Serbian Progressive Party in Belgrade and the government in Belgrade. In that sense, it is really the main role of this party is securing this integration or disintegration process, depending really on the kind of the atmosphere, the political atmosphere we're in. But when it comes to the local perspectives and the local community, back then and today, I think the perspectives didn't change. I mean, if you speak to the people about their willingness to integrate and become a part of the Kosovo institutional framework, it didn't change much. I mean, I think that people just became more aware of the reality they're living in, and they learned how to live in that reality, but it was not a willful process for them. What is another very important thing to emphasize is that back in 2013, we did have a very strong boycott movement against the implementation of the Brussels Agreement and against the holding of the elections. The political force that was in the meantime, in a way, crushed, and the political opposition that was fading over time due to the situations and things that happened that Tanya just mentioned, that now we really have a non-existent political opposition or pretty much any democratic capacity when it comes to the local community, local Serb community.
This will be one of the points for discussion later, but thank you for sharing your initial thoughts. And then let's move on to Donika. Donika, what is the perspective from Pristina? What is the stance of Kosovo society when it comes to the signing of the Brussels Agreement? And what were your expectations in regards to the implementation process?
It was all of a sudden that we entered the political phase of the dialogue. I mean, there is the line between what was considered technical between Kosovo and Serbia, led by Edita Tahiri and Borko Stefanovic, and then we are entering a new phase, which is more political, heavy issues are being discussed, and then the agreement itself was a bit confusing. I mean, as every other agreement signed in Brussels because of constructive ambiguity. So the first step was like, let's
let's deconstruct it and let's see what they agreed on. Because, I mean, 8 years after, we still don't have transparency in the process. So basically, if it lacks transparency, then of course there is no inclusivity in the process. So what was designed to deliver for the citizens of Kosovo, being Serbs but also Albanians, it was something that was completely detached from their needs, from their reality, but also from the political reality in Kosovo. So basically, the first step was let's deconstruct it, and then let's see how do we implement it. What are the capacities? What is the political will? I mean, we're talking about an uncharted territory for the Kosovo agreement government, because for the first time we were trying to extend a presence in a territory which was probably, I mean, one of the most complex, and it still remains complex for the government of Kosovo. So then deconstructing it was the first phase. I remember back in the days, we also it was like dividing North and South Mitrovica formally was one feeding the fears that, I mean, also sort of once again, reassuring that, there is a new reality in there. There is a bridge dividing the two cities, and that other part is now then called North Mitrovica. It has a mayor, and it will be, of course, for us, it was really interesting on how do we navigate further on. Of course, then the security aspects were the aspects that were heavily discussed in Kosovo, which we'll, of course, touch upon later on. But for us, from the security perspective, was like it was a lot of concern on how do we manage all of this new situation created with this agreement, and then what will happen to the Serbs in the south. Because if you look at the agreement, it's kind of crafted in detail about the north and 4 municipalities there, but also like the judiciary and all. But then what will happen to the Serbs in the south, which basically my field research says that they feel left behind by both Serbia, Kosovo, and of course the international community. I mean, it's 8 years after, it's a huge disappointment, because it started as something aiming to bring normalization, and what we saw in the past 8 years was lack of willingness to implement what the parties signed up for, and of course, and the second one is like securitization of the process. So basically, just became a process in which instability was generated, and then in order to create stability, and it was a never-ending cycle of issues that we are still sort of suffering until today.
Thank you for this introductory round of your answers. I think it's a really good opportunity to jumpstart the debate. So the Brussels Agreement, as I said, it's called officially the first agreements on the principles of normalization. And I remember when it was signed, the expectations were extremely high in the international community, and
Yeah, but if I may, the international community set the expectations high, because they themselves, wanting to be presented as a key actor in peace building and also like international negotiations. They came up with this historic agreement, which then, we had a lot of historic agreement, which then failed to be implemented or not. Yeah. We're not even in agreements.
Exactly. The agreement itself was considered the shiniest trophy in the European Common Foreign Security Policy. If I remember correctly, there were even talks about those who initialed the agreement to be nominated for Nobel Peace Prize as well at the time. So the expectations were extremely high in the international community. And now, did I remember, we recently did an analysis of a public opinion poll regarding the support to the dialogue, and citizens of Serbia actually had the biggest support for the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue in April 2013, after the agreement was signed, which means that even people had high expectations. But maybe just to remind the viewers about what were the points of this agreement. So briefly, local elections were supposed to be held in North Kosovo, municipalities formed and integrated in Kosovo institutional framework. There were provisions to create or establish association of Serbian municipalities in the north. There were provisions to dismantle Serbian security institutions, police, civil protection units, and then integrate them into Kosovo institutional framework, to dismantle Serbian judicial institutions, integrate them into Kosovo framework. And lastly, there were some final provisions regarding not blocking, Serbia and Kosovo not blocking each other on their respective European paths. And I wanted to maybe touch upon most of these topics and see to what extent actually these provisions have been implemented. So Jovana, maybe let's start with you. What is the political life in Kosovo, in North Kosovo, like after the signing of the agreement? Because of the elections Tatiana mentioned, they were organized. They were the first thing to be implemented from the Brussels Agreement, and then the local municipalities were established. What is the political life? What was the impact of this agreement on the local political life in North?
Well, as for the impact on the local political life, it has led to that there is none. I mean, there is one political party representing the entire community on the central and local level. They're holding the 10 out of 10 guaranteed MP seats in the Kosovo parliament, the ministries, and also the 10 out of 10 Serb-majority municipalities. And this was done in a way to, I believe, from the Serbian perspective, to make sure that this whole implementation of the agreement and the integration process goes smoothly. If they would be a political opposition and a lot of political actors within the Serb community, this would make it way more difficult, especially because of the strong back then boycott movement, but the general still present sentiment of the local community that they do not feel they are part of the Kosovo institutional framework. And I think this is very important to emphasize that in this process, of course, this was not only the mistake coming from the Serbian side in making sure to reach the goal in this sense, but it was also the responsibility of the international community that in the beginning actually supported this and applauded to this, and now we are suffering from the consequences of actual no democratic capacity when it comes to, or political capacity in the Serb community. But also the responsibility lies very much on the Kosovo institutions themselves, because that in that period of time, they did not really reach out or try to make the Kosovo Serb community feel welcomed within the Kosovo institutional framework. And this can be seen throughout, many different things, but especially when it comes to the implementation of its own laws, the law on the official languages, or the representation of the ethnic composition within, of the municipal servants in the institutions, and so on. So in this sense, there's a general distrust, and I think for the local Kosovo Serb community, the biggest distrust is actually toward the Kosovo institutions. But in the end, it is a situation as complex as it is, and it's actually quite complex, because we do have this hybrid system existing not only in the north, but also in the south, where in addition to the Kosovo institutions that now have been now that are present with police and judiciary, and the local governments as well, but we still have the present very essential institutions within the Serbian system, like the healthcare, the education, the social welfare, that actually are coming in, and they're the only source of for the Serbian community. So we cannot really speak about them as parallel, but the only actually institutions for the Serbian-speaking communities.
Thank you, Jovana. Tatiana, do you want to chime in on this as well? I mean, you did mention violent acts that took place during these elections, the trashing of ballot boxes. Everything happened under the very watchful eye of the international community, who turned the blind eye to these events. So would you say that this price that it was paid for this integration was well worth it? And I mean, especially from the point of view of today's development in the north.
I look very simple at that. Some crimes took place. Some crimes have not been revealed up until today. As long as, you do not reveal the crimes, and you do not process all those criminal acts that took place in front of everyone, and as long as you even applaud or even turn blind eye to that, you don't expect flourishing of democracy, improvement. I would even, into that regard, even disagree that the high price has been paid to the integration, because I don't believe in any kind of integration of systems and planning a functioning society if that society has been created, or one system has been created upon illegal foundations. This is not a solid building. This is a shaky building, and by time it just destroys even its immediate surrounding. I just want to add some overall impression when I mention about this hybrid reality. Which way we have walked to this day, which is also connected to what I've mentioned in 2013 and 14. So we have these crazy images that are actually applauded even up until today. On one side, we have Belgrade that insists all of these times in its public narrative that these were temporary institutions of self-government in its southern autonomous province. And in preparations for the Brussels Agreement, it abolished local self-governance in the north by force, then in the rest of Kosovo, also all 10 predominant Serbian municipalities, and the temporary municipal bodies continues to operate 8 years later in confliction to the Serbian laws and in what is actually Kosovo reality. As for Pristina, it continued to say that the compromise is mutual recognition. To recognize Serbia 10 years after its unilateral act of independence and its Kosovo goodwill for a dialogue if it recognizes Serbia as a state. But imagine what, to recognize a state that actually for 100 years has its confirmed international subjectivity, and after that legally recognized country recognized the loss of its described most sensitive and precious territory. Finally, the third stakeholder, the EU, that all the time it insists upon talking in a positive tone, within the positive climate of reconciliation and well-being of its citizens, closing the eyes to the fact that the public actually, for the 8 years, have been exposed to harsh words, untruths, half-truths, high politicization, messages about ethnic and religious intolerance, and even ethnic hatred, with the exception, of course, for the 2 years. So all that practically even comes from the political leaders. This hybrid reality actually, if I may say, the nucleus and the embryon was in what we actually witnessed in 2013 and 14 with this organizing of the elections in Mitrovica.
Thank you, Tatjana. I really like this expression, hybrid reality. Donika, how does this political development in the north looks from Pristina perspective? How does this shaky building looks like? What is the perceptions of Serbs and their political agency, and in particular, the perceptions of Srpska Lista as the only political organization in the north that is currently active there?
This is actually, I mean, one of the biggest discussion when we talk about the Brussels Agreement is like, how did it produce something like Lista Srpska? How did it monopolize the political representation of the local Serbs, and how hard it is to actually navigate and work in an environment that is completely captured by a political party, which is not becoming hybrid in a way, because it's not just Srpska Lista, but it's also including other minority groups which are basically part of the Kosovo Assembly. If you look at the latest elections, then it also has the Gorani, Roma, and Bosniak community. So it's not just Lista Srpska, but it's further expanding. So of course, this is like one of the biggest issues that we don't even know how to get out of it at this point, because we can not even think about another political party, Serbian political party or opposition to Lista Srpska would exist. I mean, we tried a lot. I mean, now Prime Minister Kurti, in the previous election government, he basically tried to extend cooperation to the Nenad Rašić, but then of course his political power was extremely weaker when it, in comparison to what Lista Srpska has. Now for the Brussels Agreement in general, it really depends on how the agreement, the dialogue as a process was sold to the citizens of both Kosovo and Serbia, but then of course the Serbs in the north. Of course, you know, this agreement in a way turned the Serbs in the north as a political tool for both Pristina and Belgrade in a way, both using the citizens in the north and the situation in the north to basically increase their power internally, and of course negotiate in negotiation table. But I mean, little has been done to basically deliver on the needs of the citizens directly. If you look at the Pristina side, then of course a lot of processes have been considered successful in a way that, you know, if you look on paper, then there is the agreement on security. Basically, it was a process which took place super fast. I mean, we were working together when we sort of, in a way, monitored the beginning of the process. process in which, like, all of a sudden, the former members of Serbian police, but also the civil protection, which was more problematic, basically just became Kosovo police, and even the vetting process, but the training process was extremely fast, to which we can, the pace which we couldn't really follow. And then it was successful in the beginning, but then there are a lot of issues. So if you look at it from the Brussels perspective, there is a tick, you know, it's progress. I mean, just today I saw a report recently published in Pristina that says that it's implemented, but then there are a lot of elements within the Kosovo police in the north that are problematic and which no one is actually talking about it. And I mentioned to you before the panel that, you know, the 2018 discussion about territorial exchange, in a way, kind of I think the parties, even like especially in Pristina, gave up, you know, pretending that they are integrating, because then we created a whole new reality and expectations for the citizens living in the north. And the same with the judiciary. I mean, Jovana can mention, you know, more details about the problems there, but then it really reflects how, you know, basically the Kosovo government saw integration only, you know, for the physical existence of some buildings, but not necessarily the people. And then, of course, there were a lot of problems with the municipalities as well, because then you have two municipalities basically operating, one parallel and one, you know, from established by the Kosovo government, basically operating in the same city. So this one, you know, basically all the agreements and the implementation of it has been just checked, crossed. Some, you know, that like association which hasn't been implemented at all, then remains on hold, but the rest, basically, there is some sort of camouflage towards Brussels. The problem with it is that there is no ownership. I mean, that's why, I mean, even in Kosovo, like, it is very hard to actually talk about it, because you can hardly find the agreement itself anymore. I mean, it has been like on autopilot mode, that we sort of forgot what's in there and what's there to be done, and where is the action plan and what's the next step. It is now the current government that wants to extend internal dialogue, but then the current government has to basically cooperate with Lista Srpska, which represents the Serbs in Kosovo, with which, you know, basically they don't share, they are not on good terms, but then also, like, probably, hopefully extend cooperation with a civil society organization to reach out to the local population. So far, it has been problematic in a way, and I really hope that someone will truly, now with the new government, go after the Brussels Agreement and really check what is actually implemented and what are the real problems in order to tackle the issue properly. Other than that, it's then, you know, we'll enter a new phase in which we'll really have to be creative and come up with something, a new cycle of negotiations to basically reconsider everything that has been achieved so far, which will be problematic under the circumstances, and also the insisting of the EU that we should just pick up from where we left off, which is a bit problematic.
Thank you for bringing up these points about the integration of police and judiciary. We will discuss those in detail, because these arguably have had the biggest impact on the lives of the locals. But before that, all three of you made points that the agreement itself was very poorly communicated, both by Pristina, by Belgrade, but also by the Brussels. So if we could just quickly go around the panel. And what would be the biggest failure in this communication, and what could have been done differently to improve the outlooks of its implementation? Jovana, maybe start with you.
Well, I think that the problem is with all the negotiations before and with the agreement is this constructive ambiguity. I mean, this is the kind of the issue of the previous phase of the dialogue, and it's just that which really allowed for the, you know, unilateral interpretations of the points of the agreements, which has led to the issues that we have today. And I think the whole process that it was done on a political level, of course, and didn't engage the local community, and it's understandable it doesn't engage the local community, even though it's concerning the most the local community in the end, especially the one living in the north. It is the problem, the actual implementation of these agreements. And as Donika mentioned, it's really important to go back and really see what has happened. But I think that the biggest kind of problem that has put us in the position that we are here today, and I think the reality for us would look completely different that if in 2013 the Association for the Serb Majority Municipalities was established, which was really not the case. And in that sense, it really led to kind of the slowing down of the integration process, to the actual pause that was resumed actually last year. So in a sense, it is really the overall lack of the communication and the possibility of the interpretation that allowed really for the two governments to create narratives that they saw fitting their agenda at the moment. But now I think with this kind of a new approach of this nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, we may potentially, you know, it aims really to prevent something like that. We will see really what the situation is going to be with that.
So constructive ambiguity and having this agreement open to different interpretations. Donika, what would you nominate as the biggest failure in terms of communication?
A lack of ownership. I mean, it's not just communication. It's like who owns the process? I mean, the EU keeps, you know, sort of referring to itself as just facilitator offering the table. I mean, and that's it. So no active role in the dialogue, and the agenda would depend on the parties, but then who actually has ownership for the agreements that has been signed? I mean, it is very hard to find the actual text of the agreements and the External Action Service website. You know, it's either, you know, the website here of the government of Serbia or Kosovo, and even those, when you compare, they just, you know, the number of agreements reached is not, you know, the same. So, like, how many agreements have we signed? Are they agreements or technical protocols or letter of intents? Or I mean, in Brussels, they even hesitate to call them agreements at some point. So, not taking ownership by the EU, but also by the parties, was one of the biggest issue. Then, of course, the constructive ambiguity. I am aware of the fact that the EU wanted to use this as a strategy to basically come up with agreements that, you know, leave spaces and gaps until the parties actually are ready and prepared to go for something bigger, such as the final agreement between the parties. But then in the Balkans and between Kosovo and Serbia, it had a completely different effect. Basically, the parties use the gaps left by the constructive ambiguity to sell it differently to the public. Now, if you look at the expectations of the citizens towards the dialogue, because we're talking here about the, you know, expectations and local communities. I mean, how can you assess the actual progress in which both parties have different expectations and the end goal of the dialogue? I mean, it is very hard to actually how can you assess an agreement that actually does not reflect the needs of the citizens on the ground, but is, you know, just to politically please some parties. So then, of course, is communication and how the two chief negotiators in Kosovo and Serbia used it in a way to consolidate their power internally. So the rhetorics that has been built after 2013, the political crisis in Kosovo, and how many governments in Kosovo have been actually, you know, like overthrown or failed, or how many snap elections we had just because of the misunderstandings and between the political parties in relation to the dialogue, then speaks volumes about the communication to the citizens, but also among political parties. The association, for instance, I mean, we constantly look at the 2015, 2013. We still cannot agree on what is the actual agreement that we are implemented. And that, of course, caused many issues in Kosovo, which then second panel will discuss. It will be probably one of the biggest challenge in what is coming up when it comes to the Brussels dialogue.
So local ownership would be one of the issues. Tanya, your 2 cents on the same issue. You've been reporting on how Serbs in the north have been living since the signing of the agreement. What could have been done differently, communicated better in order to manage their expectations better?
I'll just speak strictly about the communication. 2 major issues were lacking in order for a better communication and for a better result. A lack of honest intention. This is what I felt, that at least, you know, 2 sides did not share honest intention. And B, I would say actually all 3 stakeholders, and B, a lack of competencies. So even if one was lacking, we would already face a problem, let alone with all two. So as I say, lack of honest intention and lack of competencies. In terms of lack of honest intention, I still dream of the finals diplomacy in politics and the finals activism in politics. We didn't see this finest nobility and humility in politics as politics should be. This is what we didn't see, and that's why I talk about lack of honest intention and lack of competence. It's certainly there were a lot of these European technocrats not knowing really much about their work, actually doing everything they could do not to mess into their own work, and covering up everything, covering up with this bigger major political goal. But at the end of the day, this is what I have proven to recognize as a major political goal, described as I tell you, a noble political goal, a humble political goal. And when I talk about a noble and humble political goal, then I refer of the people as the last address. So I would agree with Donika in one segment where I felt the lack of ownership. It was about the people. There was no ownership when it comes to people. Doesn't matter, Serbs, Albanians, Kosovo Serbs, Kosovo Albanians, Albanians, Serbians, people around the Balkan. This is, I think, the biggest problems generally with the politics in the Balkan, that we lack only one ownership. This is the ownership of people. So communication is not an alien, just extracted as the European Union, both Belgrade and Pristina try to do. That's why I talk about hybrid reality and engineering of peace and engineering of dialogue mixed somewhere in some laboratory, very often with these competencies under question mark, and so much alienated from the people. So we didn't see this organic, the organic ownership. This is the key problem, and then you don't fake people. No matter what kind of press releases you produce, no matter what kind of statements, you can produce fake news, you can produce propaganda, you still can cause a great damage, you still can have thousands of followers to believe you, but at the end of the day, sooner or later, you end up in a dead corner. Communication should not be an extracted activity because it is about the words, and the words should come from sincere thoughts, accurate thoughts and sincere intentions.
Thank you, Tanya. Let's continue.
Sorry, yeah. A lack of genuine approach in the dialogue. All of this has happened because the parties entered the process without an end goal, to be honest. I mean, from the Vučić side, it's most like, it of course is heavily linked to the EU integration process, and of course meddling in Kosovo and having an issue that is still an open dispute, which is really important for the EU, then of course gives him political leverage. And of course in Kosovo, like after the ICJ, then this was kind of a thing that in a way, we were thrown into this process by externally, and it's not that we organically felt like, this is a process in which we should be, because for Kosovo, everything would have been closed in 2010 with the ICJ decision. So all of this, basically, if you look at the parties, how they engage in the process, it says a lot about, the actual outcome of the process. You mentioned the public perception, and you have done a very, very brilliant study, which really shows the diametrically different approaches that the citizens have, because this is how the political leaders have been selling it to them in the past years.
Thank you for this intervention. I do have a little bit one more question before we include the audience. Tanya, I wanted to start with you. So as I mentioned, police and judicial integration were a big part of the agreement. So police integrated in 2014, judicial system was integrated in 2017. How did this change the local safety? How does the local safety in North Kosovo, how does it look like today? Has the security of citizens been improved, and their access to justice in terms of expectations after the integration of the judiciary? If you can quickly comment, and then I will ask the other panelists as well.
I'm not any expert to analyze police or judiciary issues, but I can speak as a citizen. If you ask me, has my feeling of security improved? I would tell you no. I'm pretty sure that generally, more or less, entire population share this impression that their security has not been increased at all. On contrary, it has worsened. Although we did have a turning point, which was the assassination of Oliver Ivanovic, that I'll just quote one of a friend of mine who met me 2 months after the assassination of Oliver Ivanovic, and who told me, I quote, "Poor soul, he had to sacrifice himself for us to feel being liberated." I must say that I didn't understand what he was talking to me, because this personal feeling of freedom to me is extremely important, and I cannot function if I don't have free space around myself. But I, of course, cannot be happy if everyone else, you know, is so much afraid around me. So to what I witnessed over the years was this this huge fear of being afraid to say anything loud, to meet your normal citizens' obligations, let alone to exercise some other personal or human rights like politics or freedom of speech, etc., etc. Particularly to conclude with police and with judiciary, I think who is enjoying the best moments with the integration is judiciary currently. Serbs who are integrated into the Kosovo system. But this is my very much personal feeling that actually I discussed with other people as well. I know they would strongly deny me. They would probably feel offended if I share this thought. But I think the moment they have integrated into a society, those are their moments. Kosovo Serbs are all those years pretend to be dead so they do not suffer more damage. They are buying time, and they're still very much dwindled community and more powerless in this political capacity. Now, with this kind of services that have integrated successfully, such as judiciary, because they wouldn't sign any paper on integration until they settle down all contract package with very solid salaries, pensions from Belgrade and good salaries from Pristina, baby liked by both systems, Belgrade who applaud to sacrifice for their own country, Pristina who applaud that you have judiciary who is integrated into a new system, and again, the lack of ownership, the lack of exercising their rights are again the people. What I'm trying to say is that the least active and the least active work I see now in courts. I know they will strongly deny me, and they will have a lot of shiny figures. But if you really check what is going on with lawyers and what is going on with court cases, you will see that apart from prosecutors' office, when it comes to other segments of judiciary, they're really they're saying great work, but still very much off the attention of the public eye, as they are like a direct direct product of both of the system and as I call it, consuming integration. It's about the privileges. I will have to sacrifice, but someone has to pay me back. And I don't have to do my duty. I don't have to shake the ground, because it's a very unstable system. It's a limbo. And let me do the least what I can and the least what I'm asked for. Similar is with the police, but the police is completely different story. They have to be active, and they are maybe the most successful actually project within the Brussels agreement, I think, in terms of how this was integrated, and their job is the way that they cannot stay just indoor activities. They also have to show their presence on streets, but at the same time, police is not a guarantee of safety to the citizens. And there is a long history between what police has been done within these 8 years as integrated with what really citizens feel as their safety.
Thank you, Tanya. Quick question. How safe do you feel to be working as a journalist in the north? If I'm not mistaken, shots were fired at your office, cars burned. Every once in a while, there is a big security incident in the north. Again, several dozens of cars burned. How would you comment on the work of the police in these cases?
On institutional level, from 1 to 5, 0. On my personal level, 1 to 5, I would say 5. Mm-hmm. But it's with my nature and with with my beliefs and my character and my mindset. But in terms of institutional feeling of safety, it's a 0.
Thank you. Keep up doing this great work. We have little time, and I think Tanya provided a very comprehensive assessment of the judicial and police integration. If you want to comment on that, but I also would feel amiss if we missed discussing the Association of Serbian Communities. So both of you, Donika, maybe you start, briefly comment on how does it look from Pristina perspective, the integration of police and judiciary, and then what is up with the Association of Serbian Communities?
Well, when it comes to the police integration, I will not focus on the judiciary because Tatiana, gave a more local, comprehensive approach on that side. From the police perspective, I mean, as I said in the beginning, it looked like it was successful because, I mean, first, Kosovo Police is a very successful institution. Even, in general in Kosovo, it enjoys quite a lot of support from the general public. But, the approach towards, who has been integrated in the Kosovo Police and has access to sensitive information, it's always, who do they work for? Do they still work for, the biggest hesitation is like, do they still work for the Serbian institutions? Mm-hmm. Or they've just been camouflaged with, Kosovo police uniform and still, sort of work parallelly? This is the first question that boils in Pristina mostly. And then who has access to our information, And it was very interesting, an information that, an experience that I want to share with Marko, your former colleague, who, just asked me a question like, two of my journalists, my journalists who came to North Mitrovica and they were doing some investigation and the car, was burned down. And then when I started, my answer was like, in normal cases in Kosovo, you can do this. If there is a CCTV, if there is a Kosovo police. But then I realized that it's not normal because I didn't know the actors. I didn't know who are the Kosovo police members, how much they are connected to the criminal groups, or how do they function. So for me, it was kind of, in normal cases, you act like this according to this law and that law, but in North Mitrovica, you just be thankful that no one was hurt, and then try to talk to the locals and see how can you approach this issue. So I mean, this is a general perspective that it's a big unknown. Served as a success, but we don't know. I mean, because in Oliver Ivanovic's case, there were a lot. People from, persons from the Kosovo police were kind of linked to the murder, and a lot of news circulated in Pristina sort of gave this negative approach towards it. And then, of course, is the capacities, how much of the capacities they have to actually respond technically to the needs of the citizens. The second one on the association, I mean, that's definitely something that will be discussed in the second panel, but because that's the future. But it's very important to discuss about, this general trauma that exists in Kosovo and the narrative that it will look like Republika Srpska, and in the future, if this has executive powers, it will be problematic for the internal function of the country. So this is the biggest fear that has been generated in Kosovo since this agreement has been signed. And then, of course, this agreement has never made it to actually build in the statute of it. So we don't even know how to regulate it, or how much power it will have, or what's going to be the role of the association. So now we have two different approaches. One from Belgrade, which wants an agreement that has been signed, of course, which was ruled as unconstitutional in Kosovo. And then Kosovo insisting that the association should look like a local NGO that me and Jovana have, sort of established in Kosovo, which then, it's like completely different, and in which, I mean, now, as we stand, the hope for a middle ground is kind of, inexistent. But that's definitely one of the most heated topic when it comes to what is happening in Pristina, and that's going to be for Kurti to decide on how to navigate from now on.
Thank you. Jovana, do you want to fill in also the integration of police judiciary, but also what are the expectations of Serbian citizens in the north regarding association and whether it will ever be established?
Yes, I will touch base first on the police and judiciary. I believe actually Tanya covered a lot, and I think it's important to emphasize that the integration of police was actually one of the examples of successful integration, as well as judiciary, which came later in 2017. But what we have, the problem concretely with judiciary now is the problem with the big amount of cases that were not being solved, with the problem with the lack of or improper translation that is happening, or the general problem of interpretation of this legal documents, both in Albanian and Serbian. So there are actually many problems with that. But I would not waste this time on that. But I would like to also emphasize one thing is the general lack of trust in the Kosovo institutions generally when it comes to the Serb community, especially when it comes to the police. And this really shows through the maybe even the latest incidents that we have, and the incident in Gračanica that happened with the beating of a minor, actually not a teenager, but generally really it's a long way ahead for the Kosovo Serb community to actually gain trust in the Kosovo institutions. As for the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities, this is something that from the Serbia side has been presented as the most important element of the Brussels Agreement that needs to be implemented. As I mentioned before, the lack of willingness from the Kosovo side to do it when the time was for it, back in 2013 or 2015. But what is really important to emphasize is that after the agreement being ratified by the 2/3 in the Kosovo Parliament, and also the Constitutional Court ruling in 2015, it is not a question whether should Kosovo establish the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities, but in what capacity and with what mandate this association will be established. So this is actually really important to emphasize. This is the international obligation of Kosovo. It needs to be done at one point in time. Now it is just a matter of that, of what this body will look like. What is really important is that the body should serve the purpose of the protecting of the rights of the Kosovo Serb community, especially in relation to the education, healthcare, social welfare, and even economy. But it is also very important to keep in mind that even though from the Serbian side there is this push for the need of the executive powers of the ASM, there is also one thing that needs to be taken into consideration, that it really doesn't affect the functioning of the Kosovo institution in the process. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the final solution for the ASM will look like. I think it's just inevitable when it's going to happen. It's not a question if.
Thank you. Natalia, do you maybe want to, we have 30 seconds, if you want to give us your 2 cents on the Association of Serbian Communities. Just realized I didn't give you the opportunity to answer.
No, I'll just...
Okay, let's move on then. We have some questions from the audience. The first one is for you, Tanya. So well, I can't tell who asked this question, but the question is, what solution for Kosovo would satisfy you as a Kosovo Serb? I suppose it refers to the dialogue and the outcome of the dialogue.
It's not about what solution will satisfy me as a Kosovo Serb, but what solution would satisfy me as someone who really pledges for the peace. Personally, I can't stand anything that comes artificial, anything that comes, as I told you all this time mentioning, is hybrid, anything that comes as peace engineering or this industry of peace. I'm fed up of words meaning nothing or words meaning completely opposite to what is organic need. To search for the peace, it's a long way process. Mm-hmm. What would satisfy to me is to remove all censors when it comes to the truth. The truth must be said. Doesn't matter if it's an ugly truth, but it must be said. To what would satisfy to me is that, and I think, just to add, I think Kosovo Serbs are ready. When I told you that Kosovo Serbs are like a non-existent community, very much off this public arena pretending that they are dead. That could be also a good sign, because they are seeing these kind of artificial narratives. They're seeing this kind of radicalization of public narratives coming from all these sides, and having European stakeholders pretending to be positive, actually dead all those years. So it's necessary, it's not that bad for Kosovo Serbs. If I may be a bit partial, but I think it's quite an objective remark. I think that the most mature part in this process currently are Kosovo Serbs. It's not because they are smarter than anyone else or educated, let alone, but they actually have been victimized for the past 20 years. They have been, this little ingredient in the sandwich or in the fight of the elephants, and they are more observant. When I say that they are more mature, they're more observant of all those narratives and what real reality is. So what would satisfy me is that sides should wake up and say, okay, where is the starting point? The starting point is to say the truth, but not also the way how currently Kosovo political mainstream agenda is, that every day you beat in the drum using so irresponsibly so many harsh words. Just to name one example, that you have a newly elected president of Kosovo, a university professor of international law, a woman, a mother, her complete right to feel, hurt by the crimes that took place during the war. But with all those titles you have, saying that you are the president of all of the citizens, you cannot push using that irresponsibly harsh word. I'll just mention one: insisting every day on usage of the word genocide. It's still not declared officially as a genocide. So even if you believe in something like that, as a public person in public arena, as a university professor of law, as a president, with all those titles, you're very careful in selection of words you use. How that hurts the other side, how that can force your side for using more hatred, using irresponsible violence, etc. So what would please me is that A, there is no censorship for the truth, and B, there is strong censorship on the selection of the words you use. Sides need to talk without any due reservation on unpleasant topics. All topics must be open. Everything that happened in the past, everything that is happening now, but you have to wish for the peace, and you have to be aware of the other. The other not only as an enemy, but even if it's an enemy, to think of that enemy, what are his needs, what are his thoughts, why he thinks as he thinks. So just to conclude, what would please me is the dialogue, not the industry of peace. This is where we need to start from.
Thank you, Tanya. That was the only question we actually received from the participants, but we have 3 more minutes, so I do have prepared a backup question. Yeah. To use it as a segue into the next panel. Speaking of the dialogue, we expect every day for it to be resumed with the Kosovo having new government. And what is your stance? Like, what do you expect from the dialogue? Do you still have the trust in the process? Most of the citizens in Serbia and in Kosovo still believe that the dialogue is the right way to proceed forward. So what would your expectations be, Jovana?
Well, my expectations would be that the dialogue should be resumed, and this is the only way forward. I think that without the dialogue and without the parties talking, there's not really a high chance that we can move forward in regards to actually coming to a solution in regards to the dispute between Belgrade and Pristina. But what is very important is what Tanya was mentioning, is the narratives around the responsibility of the political leaders of the discourse that they're creating in the process. I think this is not a one-way street. It really is, it's a lot of factors that are actually playing into the role that we over time, even for me, as like from an individual perspective, when I think of the life in Kosovo before and after Brussels Agreement, I have to say that my life has improved when it comes to the movement and other aspects of life. But of course, like we were focusing on the negatives because unfortunately the negatives are there and in our faces. But the thing is that we really need to continue talking. We need to have the communities talking, and we need to address the painful topics as well. So I believe that in the long run, with the comprehensive solution, whenever that happens, it cannot really be a sustainable and comprehensive one if it doesn't include the topics of the transitional justice and actually dealing with what has happened in the past.
Thank you. Donika, 30 seconds, your thoughts on the dialogue.
Okay, I talk fast. So yeah, it's not a matter whether it will resume. It will resume, but how it will resume. So I'm really hopeful that it will resume in a good way. It will be a lesson learned for Brussels, but also for both Kosovo and Serbia to actually go back to a process which is based on principle, transparency, and inclusiveness. These are the principles and serve to the citizens. Dealing with the past, of course, is very important, and it should be done hand in hand with the dialogue process, because it's a process that will take longer, and it is imperative that the parties actually build the narratives that actually moves the party towards the process and not set them apart as it is happening now. I mean, both on the Serbian side and the Kosovo side. I mean, Vučić sort of denying Rashak massacre is something that was followed up immediately on building narratives in Kosovo that this is happening. So I believe that this is imperative, but it should be a process that is based on basic principles that we as civil society pushed for. I'm informed that soon there will be a meeting, and I hope that this is going to be the last call for Brussels to actually have ownership and genuine approach towards the process, not engage on stabilitocracy the way it did in the past decade.
Thank you. Tanya, 2 sentences if you want to comment on the dialogue. We have 15 seconds.
Dialogue, I think the dialogue is actually happening. This is what we are not currently seeing publicly. It's a very silent Brussels, I call it quiet Brussels, is currently under the radar of the public, pretty much how it started back in 2011, 2012 in preparation, 2013. So the line was practically open in parallel with Grenell's initiative towards Washington last spring, summer, and after the Brussels dialogue was put on a respirator before the coronavirus. So in that quiet brushing, the so-called technical arrangements, just mentioned few, license plates, electricity, missing people. So these meetings, these task force groups, although still very much invisible to the general public, they do produce results, but remain off from the public arena, as I told you, in the same mysterious way. So there, I see the results. I don't have much information what's really going on, but I see the results. So I presume that some kind of final agreement is being worked on, at least on the basis of these new documents. I can assume that something is really taking place. Whether this will be reached in this year, I don't think so.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Jovana. Thank you, Donika. I really enjoyed having you at the panel. I hope that we will help this dialogue be removed from this respirator machines and then maybe jump-start it soon. I would like to thank the participants for sticking with us for an hour. I would like to invite you to stay for the next panel as well. The panel will be focusing on the prospects of reaching the comprehensive normalization agreement. There will be a 10 minutes break, and then you can rejoin us. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful day.
Hello, and welcome to the second panel of our today's discussion called 8 Years Since the Brussels Agreement, How Close is the Solution? My name is Filip Eidus. I'm the president of the board of the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy, and I will be the moderator of today's discussion. In the first panel, you had the opportunity to learn a lot about the influence of the Brussels Agreement on citizens and on the local communities. In the following hour, we will focus on the future relationships of Belgrade and Pristina, and we will raise the question, are we approaching the final agreement? Before I introduce the speakers, let me first inform you that you can join the discussion on the BCSP YouTube and Facebook channels. And the panel's working language, as you can see, is English, but translations into both Serbian and Albanian are provided on the BCSP YouTube channel. You can also pose your questions and make comments on Facebook and on YouTube stream, and we will be seeing your questions on the screen, and we will use them during our Q&A session. I have a great pleasure to introduce my three English speakers. First of all, to my left is Rada Trajkovic, who is the president of the Serbs, the European movement of the Serbs from Kosovo, and also a long-standing politician and experienced person who has a lot to tell about the subject at hand. Second to my left is Borko Stefanovic, who was, among many other things, the chief negotiator in Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, and someone who was a key actor during the early phase of the technical dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. And last but not the least, together with us, we can see him on the screen from Kosovo, is Agron Bajrami, who is the editor-in-chief of Koha Ditore. Without any welcome, Agron, to the panel and everybody else.
Regards.
So, without any further ado, maybe we can start, Borko, with you. Given the fact that you have this perspective from the very early ages and the very early time of the negotiations, how does this current moment look to you? Do you think that there are good chances that there will be some final agreement anytime soon?
I seriously doubt it. I have to say that the current situation looks pretty much frozen, unfortunately, and it looks like that both sides are even drifting away from future solution. I think that we are pretty much accustomed for the statements coming from both Belgrade and Pristina that are harsh and that are pretty much entrenching both sides in their positions, which is really, really negative. And I think that the fact that now we have the current government in Belgrade that is focused on everything else, and at the same time we have new government in Pristina that is also focused, at least verbally, on everything else than the dialogue, it seems to me that the diagnosis of this situation is not so positive, and I have to say that it looks further away from the solution that we are all trying to find. And that solution should be, brought into some sort of an overall agreement between Belgrade and Pristina that would include things that are still not implemented from the past, but also things that are now stand as huge blocks in front of us, hurdles at this path of European integrations of the whole of the Western Balkans. So I think that with these statements coming from Pristina, that, for example, from Mr. Kurti or Lady Osmani and others who are saying that, we have other things, other priorities, and on the other side, Aleksandar Vučić, who is on our side running further into nationalistic rhetorics and isolationist rhetorics, maybe toying again with some messages that really have huge, enormous resemblance to statements from the 90s, I have to say. And it's obvious that he's now pretty much playing the last card. And the last card is going to the safe haven of all isolationists, revisionists, or nationalists in the Balkans. And the trump card is, I will speak only to my people, to my voters. I will promote that we are the best, that we are endangered by everybody else. And of course, digging in the dirt of the past, which is the favorite sport in the Balkans, as you know. So we have a not so pinky situation right now that means, in really concrete terms, that technical dialogue is dead, that the current dialogue is not going anywhere, that they are not even meeting each other, that they don't know what they will talk about, and furthermore, at least for us in Belgrade, we don't know what they've been talking about. So there is this cloud of secrecy still concerning the dialogue. People in Serbia are not so adjusted or accustomed to a situation in which they can hear any information concerning dialogue with Pristina. Now this topic is completely out of the focus of our people, of our electorate, so Vučić knows it, and he knows that it doesn't bring any votes. If there is any, rapprochement or any positive thing, he knows that the only thing that brings positive points to him with his electorate is, old-fashioned hard messages. We are defending Kosovo, Kosovo is Serbian, etc. So on the other side, there is always a nice, cozy counterpart from Pristina. And in the meantime, and I will finish with this, all of them, our corrupt elites are getting richer, people are getting poorer, and they are thinking about how to leave the Western Balkans and to continue stories near the fireplace, but this time maybe in Zurich or in Munich, not in Pristina and not in Belgrade. This is really bad news for the region. There will be no progress for the region without solution. Those solutions are not easy. They're really bitter pills to swallow for everybody, both for us and for Pristina, but we need to actually bring dialogue back to life. Right now, I think it's maybe in the middle, drifting away between life and death, meaning the dialogue.
Thank you, Borko. Agron, let me turn over to you. 8 years since the Brussels Agreement has been signed, and probably a month or two ahead of the next round of dialogue. How is your assessment looking from your end?
Well, first of all, përshëndetje, pozdrav, regards to all. Happy to be with you, at least like this. I think that to be as quick as possible in answering your question, I think that the problems of this have started long before this government came in, the current government, and long before the previous and the one before that came in, at least when we talk about Kosovo. And I think that the problem, even if there will be a meeting in a month or two, the problem will remain the same, because in my view, the dialogue has gone astray since many years ago. At least, if not earlier, it has gone astray since 2017, when under Mogherini's guidance, the two sides ventured into this territory of talking about the land and not the people. And I think that we are still suffering the consequences of this, how should I put it, of this straying away from what should have been the path towards a mutual agreement. We now see that the borders are still being discussed, now disguised as some sort of non-papers which are being read and distributed regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina. But nevertheless, it is the same old story. And I think that, yes, we might see a meeting or two, but we will not see progress, because it's been years since we have seen any sort of progress. Actually, what I'm claiming is, as far as I can see, what we have registered in the last couple of years have been only regresses in terms of if the goal is to normalize relations between Kosovo and Serbia. I will not dwell too long, because we are going to talk further, of course. But in my view, I would like to maybe stress, we have expected, and I think it should have been demanded even from Mr. Lajčák as the new envoy of European Union to come up with a much clearer strategy or framework, how he sees the process further, and to clarify the issues which have been left hanging as shadows of doubt from Mogherini's time. We, of course, now here in Kosovo, we expect our government to come up with their own clear idea of what they want from this process and how they think they can get that and what is the road forward. And obviously, we need to see clearly from Belgrade's perspective what it is that Serbia really wants to get out of this. And is it possible for us to be part of that, depending on what Serbia wants? Because when we read the statements even from Mr. Vučić or Mr. Vulin yesterday, I think, regarding this non-Slovenian, supposedly Slovenian non-paper, I think there is too much ambiguity left. And if we continue the process with that sort of ambiguity, constructive or not, it doesn't matter, that ambiguity will bring us further away from a possible solution. I will stop here because I think in the minutes ahead we can maybe exchange some more views about this and other issues related.
Thank you so much for that. We will return to many of the points that you have raised, but let me now turn to Madam Trajković. If you can share with us, do you share this pessimism? I can, if I can summarize the previous two speakers regarding the future rounds of talks and regarding the perspective to reach a final agreement anytime soon.
Yeah, I think actually I could subscribe to what they said, and that's the reality, unfortunately, that we have been facing, and that makes us seek solutions for survival. And what Agron said, that the situation has been deteriorating between Belgrade and Pristina, I would say actually that is worrying for a good measure, but also on the ground, the relations between Serbs and Albanians are more strained. There have been worsened, and that's what we need to discuss, how we, Albanians and Serbs, users of former negotiations, can overcome and get over with this in a good way, because we have got all the solutions and arrangements passed. They somehow circumvented this perspective of an ordinary person. So we, ordinary persons, that they discuss and decide on, we normally don't know what they discuss. So the situation is difficult. The main signatory on behalf of the Albanian side in Brussels, Mr. Thaci, is imprisoned, and the two most powerful men are also in prison, Mr. Veseli. On the other hand, we've got Mr. Vučić, who allegedly always offers constructive approach and promises to negotiate to international community, but his negotiations and his participation actually just means extending his own position in power. He is not offering to negotiate in order to seek solution, because if he had wanted to resolve the situation, he wouldn't have offered partition project. Somebody would say it's dead, it's finished, but I, as this ordinary citizen, I was really moved by a detail. Somebody would say there was a flood in Preševo, and I heard that the Serbian government never offered a single dinar to help those citizens, and they got assistance from the government in Pristina, which in a way is a message they wanted to get across. We gave up on you. the citizens. So this non-paper offered by Mr. Janša, as Slovenia is the next presiding EU member state, so that is something that is worrying all of us. And it's just that the history of this document, of this paper, it's a matter of various surmises that actually it was written by Mr. Orban, that Mr. Rama has seen it. I don't think Vučić hasn't seen it. I don't think he is not familiar with its contents, perhaps. Mr. Putin also was a helping hand. So we are actually now on the ground of political talks that are always catering to their own interests. And on the other hand, I wish Belgrade and Pristina showed common interest in focus that would bring us to rapprochement and reconciliation. And that would be discussion on the kidnapped and missing persons, because definitely those families are waiting. They have been waiting for any news about their family members. And we, citizens, should see who are compatriots who committed crime on our behalf, identify the perpetrators, and start from within with a commitment. I wouldn't call it condemnation, but yes, prepare ourselves to accept one day that within your own nation, within your own people, there are people who bestially killed, because definitely we are all weeping our own dead, our own graves, and we fail to see the suffering of others.
Bringing this extremely important issue of facing the past and traditional justice, I assume that this will be touched upon also later in our discussion. But let me for a moment move back to the high politics, so to speak. And Mr. Stefanovic, a question for you. Can you please reflect on this relationship between the technical and the political? At the very beginning of the Brussels process, there was a hope that progress in the technical section will somehow boost the chances for the political one to stop. It seems to me that now we have reached a point when the lack of progress in the political negotiation is undermining the technical one. So can you please tell us where do you see the perspectives for any further progress in the technical or in the political dimension of the negotiation?
Well, I think you pretty much did an excellent summarization of the problem. I think that's the whole point. When we had the change of regime in Serbia, and when the progressives came to power, they decided, hey, we don't need this technical thing, and we don't need some mid or low level people in the hierarchy of the state administration to run the negotiation. And that's why we will talk about the real stuff. So they said pretty much this is not a commercial, let's forget about Coke, let's forget about Pepsi, let's talk about Coke, or the real thing. So the real thing means the status. So they said we will talk about status, we will not talk about technical issues, or the issues, as Rada said, that are influencing average people, both Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo. So by doing so, they actually moved the issue of the status from the East River to Brussels. This is what Vučić and Dačić did. And by doing so, of course, they came to a slope situation. On the other side, on Pristina side, now there is only one topic. And the topic is, hey, when you will recognize us as an independent state. Why? Because there are no more topics. Nobody wants to, burden themselves with license plates or freedom of movement or, I don't know, taxes or whatever. Now they want to talk about the real thing. Now, since they wanted to talk about the real thing, now they are pretty much in a dead-end street. And there is no progress. Why? Because there is only one breaking point, and that is their continual requests from Pristina, and not only from Pristina, but also from many Western capitals, our interlocutors, partners, and allies, who are asking from Belgrade the same question: when you will recognize independence of Kosovo? And on our side, this is the only request that we cannot fulfill. So, since we have these two rams, you know, kicking each other's heads, every other topic is completely lost. That's the verdict. That's actually the judgment over the technical dialogue. We need to make it alive again. We need to take a little step backward in order to see the whole woods, not just the wood, and to say the whole forest, and to say, hey, we need to start the real reconciliation process. That's why, you know that our party, we are probably the only party in the Western Balkans that published a declaration on reconciliation between Serbs and Albanians. In that paper, we didn't only, call for nice wishes and things like we need to reconcile, blah, blah, blah. No, we said these are the topics that we need to start negotiating now: freedom of movement, economic full cooperation, removing all the hurdles between Belgrade and Pristina, all of them, allowing people to educate themselves, to take a health care in both entities, pretty much to do everything else than the technical formal recognition of independence of Kosovo. Now, since I know our friends from Pristina, including Mr. Bayrami, probably believe that this is not sufficient. And now, if it's not sufficient, then we have secret maps, then we have Janša's plans, or not Janša's plans, maybe he's not the author at all. Then you have toying with the borders. Then you have mingling of the great powers in a wrong way in the Western Balkans. So if there is no exit for Belgrade, then some other people are coming up and saying this is not feasible because you don't want to recognize. They want only recognition. How can you resolve this? That's why we believe strongly that we need to say what Belgrade needs, as Mr. Bayrami said, what Belgrade needs verification of the right not to formally recognize independence. Everything else we have to, we must, and we will resolve. Of course, the main issue is whether Serbia can do it without being democratic. No, Serbia needs to be a democratic country in order to reach an agreement. We can continue with this Vučić and now Mr. Kurti and others trying to find some common ground, which is basically a lip service. This is a shopping window for our European partners and American partners. So it means, hey, we are doing something. Now this can last for, let's say, a year, maybe a year and a half, but then the whole thing will collapse because the roots, the fundament of this process is gone. The fundament is the real, incentive is to join Europe. Now that Kosovo is still without visa liberalization, which I believe is appalling. I think that's something that needs to be given by Brussels to Pristina immediately, if possible. And the second thing is, how can we have any talk with any of our allies if the first question is, hey, what about Kosovo? We cannot talk about corruption in Serbia or autocratic government, or because he's selling them story of stability. He's selling them story, hey, I'm about to reach some sort of agreement. And everybody in Pristina, whoever is following, they know there is the solution is not even remotely near. So we need to, I believe, to say this is what we can do. But everything else, and this is pretty much the huge chunk of issues. And there is one thing that we cannot do. And Pristina also has to swallow this bitter pill, which is we can get everything except what we hold most dear to our heart, and that is the recognition by Serbia. And of course, we can talk on and on. If recognition resolves, formal recognition by Serbia resolves anything for Kosovo, I think everybody who's been following the problem of Kosovo knows that it's ridiculous, because the act of recognition doesn't resolve anything. But freedom of movement, true reconciliation, economic, cultural, educational, healthcare ties, You know, we have now, I don't know whether it's true, Rada might know, or you, that Mr. Kurti allegedly said that we reject, you know, vaccination if it comes from countries that didn't recognize Kosovo. I don't know whether it's true, but if it's true, probably Mr. Bayrami knows. I think that's terrible. Yeah, I think that's terrible. I think it's
I can clarify that immediately if you wish. I think we have a law which says that we can only use medical equipment and such as vaccines if it is authorized by European standards organizations. And it is in our law. That's why we could not accept the gift from Albania of Chinese-produced or Russian-produced vaccines. It has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with legislation in our country, which forbids our importers to import anything that is not licensed by European authority. And this is a problem with most of these Chinese and Russian vaccines. But of course that the words will always get distorted to suit the expected viewpoint of a particular audience. And I think, and I've seen, I can follow the media in Serbia as well, since it is easy now with the internet and knowing the language. And usually, if not all, but most of the statements from here are misrepresented to fit this idea that Albanians are very radical and extreme in any way, especially when it comes to Serbs. But if we go back to dialogue, I'm not sure if I can continue now.
Yeah, I just wanted to summarize what Mr. Stefanovic said, and just a short follow-up question, because I'm really curious to know your brief explanation, if you could. You said that Serbia, as long as it's not a democratic country, cannot, or its representatives cannot negotiate a peace deal or any final solution. Democracy, as you know very well, takes a lot of time to build. Just the fact that Aleksandar Vučić might lose the election sometimes in the future doesn't mean that Serbia will be democratic. It will take years, if not decades, before we really have a functional democracy. Does it mean, that's the first question, does it mean that we have to wait for decades before we actually have a fully democratic country? And in whose interests that could be, and who would be the losers in that process? And the other one, if I can just understand you well, you suggest that we should take a step back and go back to technical issues and kind of delaying or not taking on the political one, right? Is that what you...
No.
Okay,
no.
Please,
when I said take the step back, which is a really bad parallel, so I apologize. Not literally, you know, not like in some sort of negotiations that you take the step back in a way that some nationalists in Belgrade are saying, let's take the status quo or frozen conflict, not in that sense. When I say step back, I mean to say not only technical issues, but also other political, economic issues, minus one. There is like an elephant in the room, as you know, there is this elephant, we know this there. We know what Pristina expects. We know what Washington expects. We know what, as President Biden said, for example. But they also should know what we can do. When Serbia, I think, will be ready, when it's democratized in a way that we will not have to wait for decades, of course. When I say we need a regime change, why? Not because he's so terrible, and he is, but because his policies and his approach is not feasible, it's not lasting, it's not enduring. It's like, you know, having Somoza or Batista selling, you know, telephone company in Cuba, for example, in 1957, okay? So it will last until 1958, New Year's Eve. So it's not a lasting, feasible solution. Like those maps. Those maps are toying with human lives. They are toying with stability, which is fragile, always fragile in the Balkans. Whoever takes a map, they forget about Rada's neighbors and people who live south of Iber River, for example, or people in Bosnia. They forgot about the bloodshed already. They forgot that eradicating or removing non-feasible entities in the Balkans. Yes, it cannot be replaced by pencils on a map. We need to have a democracy that is, of course, building and growing. But just to remind you, Serbia joined UN, OSCE, Council of Europe, let's say in a year after democratic changes with Milosevic. So it means it's possible.
Okay. Thanks. Now, Agron, can I ask you to maybe reflect a little bit about this, and with this we can finish the high politics section of this panel. Do you see any chances of reaching the final agreement anytime soon? And how do you explain the fact that Pristina hasn't established the association/community of Serbian municipalities? Is this something that you see happening anytime soon? And could there be an agreement without this element of the Brussels agreement not being implemented? And also, what do you think about Borko's suggestion to maybe focus more on daily life issues and technical issues without tackling the elephant in the room right away?
Well, let me look if I can handle all of these in as short as possible time. But first, with this last remark, I think, in my view, the way to address most of the issues related to the Serb community in Kosovo is to have a dialogue within Kosovo, not with Belgrade, but within Kosovo. Dialogue within the society, a dialogue on different levels, but also an institutional dialogue. Unfortunately, the dialogue in Brussels and even the 2013 agreement has made it almost impossible to include Kosovo Serbs as a community in some sort of interaction with Kosovo government or the institutions, because they are being represented by one party which is under control of the president of Serbia. I think that Srpska Lista is a direct consequence of the dialogue and the way how Kosovo actually made a mistake by granting this superpower to Mr. Vučić to create a political party in Kosovo that will represent him rather than the Kosovo Serbs. And I think this has killed the notion of democracy within the Kosovo Serb community in Kosovo, which is, I think we all should bear responsibility for that. First of all, Kosovo institutions and leaders, but then also Brussels and European Union, and also the Serbian political elite and parties, because I think it has killed any notion, any possibility that the people of the Serb people of Kosovo, that the ordinary Serbs of Kosovo are being represented within the institutions of Kosovo by their representatives. They are now being represented by Vučić people fully, and you have seen the results, and I don't want to dwell more on that. The third thing is, can we have it soon? I don't think so. I think we should, and I'm not being pessimistic as you mentioned maybe initially after my first remarks. I'm just trying to be realistic. And realistically, if I was to now combine the answer to this question together with the remark that relates to what Mr. Stefanovic said, if there is no recognition at the table, what is the incentive for Kosovo to participate in the dialogue? When we talk about the high-level dialogue, the political dialogue, the dialogue that deals with the issue of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, there is no incentive. There is no incentive. And also there is no incentive for Washington or even EU to address this as a very important issue, because if it is elephant in the room, it has to be addressed. You cannot neglect the elephant in the room. It is the main point. But then, of course, I also don't think for us it should be the main thing as a main priority as a country. First of all, I know it's difficult for Serbian politicians to accept that, publicly at least, but Kosovo's independence is irreversible regardless of the fact if Serbia recognizes it or not. On the other hand, we also need to recognize another fact, which is regardless if Serbia recognizes Kosovo's independence or not, many of our issues are going to be still complicated. And I think Bosnia is a very particular point in case, which shows that, you know, recognition per se does not solve many of the problems that relate that are between two countries. As far as having anything soon, not a final solution or agreement, but anything soon, I think, as far as I can see, in Serbia there should be elections, I think, next spring. And based on the language that Mr. Vučić employs, I don't think he's really interested into having any sort of progress in the dialogue. Maybe Mr. Stefanovic can tell us more about that, but this is my impression. On the other hand, as far as the association with majority Serb municipalities, I think the problem was in the beginning, in its inception, in all the documents related to all the agreements, which I don't know if you can call them agreements, but they were just signed by parties on different letters. There is a reference to Kosovo law, and everything has to be under the Kosovo law. But because of the constructive ambiguity, which was employed at that time and is still being employed by EU, Serbia was led to believe it can have an entity which is similar to Republika Srpska, while Kosovo was led to believe it can have something which is similar to an NGO. And I think in that regard, the whole of this can only be solved into one big package at the end of the game.
Thank you, Mr. Bayrami. Now,
I'm not sure if I responded to all the remarks that you had there.
Yes, we can now move to maybe the ordinary Serbs and to their, in Kosovo, and to their lives. Madam Trajković, can you please tell us to what extent the life of an ordinary Kosovo Serb has improved since, or has deteriorated since the signature of the Brussels Agreement? Because that was one of the reasons, or one of the things, selling points, so to speak, of the Brussels Agreement. Oh, it will benefit also the Kosovo Serbs. How and to what extent the Brussels process has benefited Kosovo Serbs, and what would be, that would be the second part of the question, what would be the best scenario of future negotiation from the point of view of ordinary Serbs, their daily lives, human rights, and the ability to simply go on?
I'll start from well, maybe the way I see all this. I must tell you that what the problem is, practically on the whole territory of former Yugoslavia, is refusal to accept the status of national minority. Almost everywhere, minorities want to have the status they used to have before. So this agreement is not exclusive for Serbs. That's how Albanians also function. If you see them in Western Macedonia, they will tell you, well, we've got our rights. They refuse to have a minority status. So from the position in Kosovo, where they gained an independent state, also by refusing the status of national minority. So that is a problem where when they tell you you're a minority, although that position actually offers a lot of benefits for your community, but somehow from the very outset, they refuse it. We are all in a very difficult position, and I understand Agron's arguments, but of course I feel more closely related to Borko's discourse, because this attachment to Belgrade is a reality. You don't feel certain or confident about the reality and Albanian majority accepting you the way of offering sustainable survival in the place where you live. For example, about the monastery of Dečani, 40 NGOs, Albanian NGOs, have signed a common protest document, a petition against against treating the monastery as one of the endangered and important sites of heritage in Europe. And this mobilization of all those people, because you count with the fact that NGOs deal with rights of minorities, but it inspires you, of course, with the mistrust, all of them, your neighbors, signing against the monastery of Dečani. And the Albanian leadership need to understand that if they label Father Sava, the abbot of the monastery, who is a person of really impressive biography, whom everybody respects, all sides. On the other hand, our church fully respects and accepts Kosovo's constitution and just fights for its own rights within the institutions and powers and arrangements within Kosovo's constitution. And the Albanian majority does not respect their own constitution. So you really have bitter taste. Who are Albanians going to talk to, if not to Father Sava? Isn't he the best reference? Agron said, discuss with Serbs in Kosovo. What Serbs? Those who should be like back in Milosevic's time, people who actually don't represent their constituents or who fully represent Albanian interests. If Father Sava is not eligible, if there is such a campaign against him in Kosovo, then I don't really see even what was acceptable to me to talk to Kurti and everybody else about cohabitation in that area. Then you start wondering, do you need a Serb to control both his heart and his mind? Is that the kind of Serb you want?
Perspective on this particular affair with the Dečani monastery. As we all know, the Dečani monastery was restituted the property a long time ago. The Constitutional Court of Kosovo has confirmed, but nevertheless, the local community is still not returning the property to Dečani monastery. And we have been seeing this campaign which Madame Trajković is talking about. Can you tell us, is this something that the Kosovo Serbs should really be concerned about? Is this a sign that the Kosovo civil society is, as Madame Trajković is suggesting, is not mature enough to respect the rights of a minority, or do you see it in a different way?
I think it's of course, it's an totally unacceptable incident, the way the language which was employed against Father Sava. But on the other hand, I think that the letter to which Ms. Trajković is referring to has to do with the Europa Nostra, not with the Dečani monastery itself. It has to do with the fact that there is wide belief that there is a very political decision behind this list of endangered objects. But anyway, what I would like to add to this, I think the whole of the affair only shows the lack of dialogue within Kosovo. So, you know, this is even more the reason why we should start a dialogue in Kosovo between Albanians and Serbs and different representatives, not only political representatives. I understand Ms. Trajković when she says that maybe most of the Serbs feel that if they engage in that dialogue without Belgrade, then they would be seen as traitors, or that we would demand or ask for them to be some sort of pošteni Serbi. What was the expression about the Albanians, the very limited number of Albanians in the 90s. But the issue, I think, is not to talk about politics, to talk about other aspects of life, the technical aspects of life if you wish so, even though I think that everything is related to politics in one way or the other, but not everything can be addressed by politicians. And I think this is the point. When Mr. Stefanovic talked about the technical part of the dialogue, I think that most of the issues which were discussed there in Brussels and have been left unsolved maybe in many cases can be discussed and should be discussed within Kosovo between the people who live in Kosovo and within the institutions in Kosovo of local level and national level. In that regard, I don't think, I was not referring to any sort of, to build a dialogue which would be a substitute for a Brussels dialogue. I'm just referring to the fact that the ordinary people's life has to be discussed with those people who are living that life. In Brussels, Belgrade was discussing mostly, and this is my impression even from discussing with Kosovo Serbs here, some colleagues and journalists, mostly the Belgrade was discussing without even consulting the Serbs' needs. So this is the point that I'm making. And the incident with Dečani Monastery and other issues related to the Albanian-Serb relations in Kosovo could be addressed much better if there would be a dialogue, a social dialogue within Kosovo between different people, different fields, academia, civic society, sports, culture, and so on, not only politicians. So I was not referring only to the political representation, but of course I was referring to the fact that these days the Lista Srpska is, so to speak, the owner of the Kosovo Serb voice in relation to the institutions of Kosovo. And this fact makes it almost impossible to have any sort of normal interaction, which again might be one of the reasons why we have situations like the one with the Dečani Monastery.
Thank you very much. And now let me ask Mr. Stefanovic one question, but now I would like you to reflect not in the shoes of former negotiator, but in the shoes of opposition politician in Serbia. Many internationals, but also some people within Serbia, criticize the opposition for not having a clear stance on Kosovo. Because within the opposition, some people are kind of more soft on Kosovo, some are harder than the government, and the electorate is also very diverse, potential electorate of the opposition. And it seems to many people that simply the opposition parties decided not to talk about the Kosovo issue. So what is your stance on it? What is the stance of your party? Is it true that you would be even harder in negotiations and maybe harder rejecter of the recognition of Kosovo, or you have more conciliatory or a different approach? If you can please illuminate all of us and say something about the policies which your party is proposing.
Well, as I said, we have adopted a platform on, we called it historic reconciliation between Serbs and Albanians. And that platform actually includes inside exact topics and ways what we should discuss as soon as possible and negotiate with Pristina. First and foremost, this elephant, and as Mr. Bayrami said, there is no incentive for Kosovo. The incentive is actually helping people, both Serbs and Albanians, finding missing persons, allowing them to travel without hindrance, allowing them to trade, economic ties, educational, academic ties, cultural ties, and healthcare. Now, I don't know greater incentive for any of us here, for example, than to allow people from Kosovo freely going to any hospital they like, or taking a jab, or being vaccinated without any hindrance or any problem. It has nothing to do with status itself. That's why we insisted so much. It's not technical issues. These are the life issues. These are I believe, huge political things, because you need to tackle all the problems, and there are numerous problems between us and Pristina. We need to remove those problems also missing persons, huge problem. War crimes, huge problem. Facing the recent past in the right way. Promoting Albanians that had been saving or have been saving Serbs, and Serbs that have been saving Albanians. Promoting them, meaning to have TV shows on RTS, on RTS1 in a prime time. The people can see what was happening, that it was not only UČK and the Yugoslav army and Serbian police, that there were acts of terrorism. And we should go to that path. And also, when it comes to the issues that we need to discuss, you know, when you really remove the formal recognition of Serbia of Kosovo, and I have to say that overall political scenery in Serbia or horizon in Serbia, there is not a single party that would be ready to recognize independence of Kosovo in a formal way. But as far as we are concerned, we are ready to resolve everything else. Now, I know that we came to this situation because of the willingness and intent by our political elites to, you know, as I said, let us discuss the real thing. And they brought us to a pit from which we cannot go out. If it was up to our recognition, you know, as I said to Mr. Bayrami, I fail to understand what is incentive for Belgrade to participate in something that is only about recognition of Kosovo. Why should Belgrade do this? We will become members of EU? No. Should we have some money coming to our economy? No. Will people in Kosovo or in Serbia have more jobs or less corruption? No. You know, we have just started to get rid of the war generation of politicians. Kosovo going forward, and we still need to catch up with this. When I say this, I'm using intentionally this word war generation. When I say I don't mean people from a certain age, I mean of people of certain misdeeds and wrongdoings during the war. And that's exactly what they did or doing in Pristina, and we need to do the same thing. Without it, we cannot reach any solution, and I believe that it's not so remote, it's not so far away, you know, and just for the, you know, in 1 second to say, I know I have to wrap it up. We are not against dialogue inside of Kosovo, society, political institutions, of course, by all means. But there are things that we need to discuss between us. For example, how will people move or play sports or be members of some international organizations or healthcare connections and things like that, or prevention of floods or finding missing persons. So Mr. Bayrami knows that there are people like Mr. Rašić and others. I know Rada knows them much better, Mr. Radojičić and others. Good luck with those guys. Just try to talk with them about anything that has sense in it. There is no chance for such a thing. So we need to create a democratic European atmosphere, an atmosphere of reconciliation, of targeting and blaming our own villains and our own war criminals and people, not to label the whole nations. And we need to detach ourselves from Berlin Congress atmosphere to the atmosphere of cadastre books and you know, things like ID cards. And these are not technical issues. And you will see in a year or two after that, people wouldn't care less whether Serbia have recognized or not, because we will start finally to tackle problems, not to tackle our national programs.
Okay, let me give you the last word, Agron and Rada, quickly, if you would like to make some final remarks.
No, I would like to make a remark about what Mr. Stefanovic said, and I would like, if I could not agree more that we need a European sort of atmosphere for this, but I think that it is exactly that what was rejected from Serbia in 2008 and 2007 and 2006, because you see, Ahtisaari package is a compromise. It was made and designed as a compromise, taking into account all the aspects that were needed by the Serb community, and also trying to give a possibility to Serbia to save its face after what it did in the 90s. I think that opportunity was lost by Serbia, but not by Mr. Vučić. You remember who was in power then. So I think, to talk about European context is nice, but we have to go back to the proper chronology of things. That's one thing. The other thing is, as I said, which is the incentive for Serbia? I don't know. You find the incentive, but if the normalization of life of Serbs in Kosovo is not really important for Serbia, then I don't know what other incentive should be. Because I think that, sorry, I think that, and this is the last that I'm going to conclude with this. I think that Serbia should have helped Kosovo to be built into a proper European democratic state in which the rights of everybody, every single individual, are respected. And as we have the constitution and the laws which are good, but are not being implemented good enough, I think that's where the Serbia could have helped to build a European sort of Kosovo. But I certainly think that intentionally Belgrade didn't want to do that. I'm not going to blame Mr. Stefanovic, who was part of the team in the technical dialogue, but I think that we can all blame also Mr. Tadic and the people who were in charge then. And the last point is about the technical dialogue. I think that there is nothing technical about missing persons. We need to go back to the reason why they are missing. And when we talk about that, it's about politics, it's about political framework, and everything that happened in the last 20, 30 years in our region has that framework there. So we need to address that. And I think that, as I said, elephant in the room is a consequence of something. It's not been put there by somebody. It has grown in that room out of history of the last 30 years.
Thank you, Mr. Bayrami. And Mr. Ajković, yours will be the last word, so please.
Well, again, I would like to go back to what I really think, and that is that we all think the way of solving minority rights actually resolves the issue of territorial rights, and that is the problem. Nobody works for something which would mean respect for human rights, like in other countries, collective and individual rights. Second, let me tell you my own experience. I've read about canister books. The father of my children wanted to sell his property because he's got a lot. He wasn't able to actually give away a single part of his property before paying kickbacks to the current owners who usurped his property, actually. And only then the price of the property on top of it. And those citizens illegally live. And we are not the only ones. It's the fate of almost all Serbs in Kosovo after trafficking in human organs. That's one of the most serious crimes taking place among us. I understand very well Belgrade has got internationally recognized borders, and it enabled Pristina to have internal independence through judicial and executive and legislative power. But neither Belgrade nor Pristina are perfect. And I tend to disagree with Agron, saying, oh, why should I care? We won't negotiate. Yes, there is a lot to negotiate. I, as a Serb from Kosovo, feel very hurt to see sometimes this vocal advocacy of the Albanian majority for the past 20 years, and Milosevic was in power for 10 years. This Albanian majority doesn't have a sense, and they developed this habit of understanding the violation of human rights only when they are concerned, when their own nationals are concerned, like some alternative human rights valid just for themselves, not for other citizens living there. I could add much more, but I will tell you in the end the reality. When we meet outside the country, in Germany or the UK or Sweden, we are friends. We can do anything to each other. If you ask my children who live abroad, they will tell you we would sooner knock at the door to our Albanian colleagues than somebody from Belgrade, some Serb from Belgrade, to seek help. But that land, that space, that territory is something that nurtured us. And I told a diplomat who asked me, observing our behavior, what's the solution? And I said, anywhere you take us, both Serbs and Albanians, we would never fight. We would do anything for each other. We would make excellent nations. But this land and the idea of giving up on it, that's something that keeps us in sort of a spasm that will take time, a lot of goodwill, sincere intentions, and the feeling that we finally need to live in peace and brighter future. And let me tell you one more thing in the end. This is really the last one. What Srpska lista, the Serb list, is, it's a project. It's not a political party. Vučić created it to implement the Brussels agreements. However, this system that international community accepted and that Albanian leaders in Kosovo also accepted, at this moment that is destroying or threatening to destroy another country, and that is Montenegro, through Democratic Front, and creating the identical mechanism of Vučić's influence in a place which he shouldn't actually control, and that's your fault. Thank you very much.
1 hour is definitely too short to even unpack all the issues that we could discuss. We unfortunately only scratched the surface. I'm sure that there will be more opportunity to sit down and discuss in a rational and argued manner as we did today. I hope that in 8 years' time we are not going to still be talking about the association of Serb communities or the missing persons, that there will be more progress over the next decade, so to speak. And on that note of cautious optimism, I would like to thank our speakers again for a wonderful discussion. I would like to thank all of you who have been with us via social media, and everybody else who is going to hopefully watch this video in times to come. Thank you again, and goodbye.
Thank you.